Welcome to Equipped for Impact, the podcast designed to assist Christian parents, leaders, and educators to raise up the next generation to stand firm in their faith and influence their world for Christ. We're your hosts. I'm Nate.
And I'm Lewis.
So let's get started. Today, we are tackling a topic that every parent everywhere can relate to. What do you do in those moments when your child messes up? That is, unless, I guess you've never done that because your kids don't mess up, right, Lewis?
I'd like to think that.
That's what you would like to think. This is where we need that sarcasm button again.
Don't most parents, though, most parents think like their kid is
perfect?
Perfect?
Yes, I think so. If you don't think your kid's perfect, then I don't know.
What are you doing?
I don't know. Maybe the rest of us are just deceived. That's what it is. No, but you understand, right? We can joke about that. We all know our kids are not perfect because they're just like us. That's where they get it from, right? But really, how do we respond? Our first instinct, because again, we're not perfect, right, Lewis? So our first instinct is to react. Your kid messes up, you're frustrated, you get angry, you lecture. How do you react in those moments? So what does this kind of look like in moments like that, Lewis?
Well, we've all been there, right?
Yep.
The sibling fight, and you step in to intervene, or the disobedience, or the attitude.
Yeah.
The eye roll or the whatever, right?
Yeah.
And before you know it, we've snapped. But what if those moments weren't just about behavior correction? And so what if they could be opportunities for discipleship, for shepherding our child's heart towards Christ? Because here's the truth. Parenting is not just about managing behavior. It would have been nice if somebody gave us a manual, like at the beginning, like when they're born, like if somebody came out of the doctor's office and was like, here's your manual for managing behavior.
Yeah.
But we know it's not just that, right? Ultimately, like we've talked about from the first episode of this podcast, it's about shaping the heart of your child. And God calls us as parents to shepherd our children. And we've made it very clear that ultimately that responsibility starts with the parent. And it's not just about getting them to act right. And for us, at least for me anyways, Nate, you may not have this problem, right? It means slowing down.
Yeah.
It means asking good questions, and it means pointing them back to the gospel. School started yesterday.
Yep. For us, this is the podcast magic, people, right?
That's right.
This is the second day of school
for us.
But you're going to be listening to this in September sometime.
Yeah. And so yesterday was the first day of school, right? And so like in my mind, I was like, all right, I want to make sure that it's a good first day, that we start good. And so my youngest daughter doesn't wake up on time. And so then we're rushing.
So who does she get that from, you or your wife?
Neither one of us, because both my wife and I are both pretty good about getting up, like when we need to get up.
Oh, okay.
And I would say neither one of us is really like a morning person.
Okay.
And so, like I got up and I was getting ready, and then I called up to her and she answered, and I thought she was up. And so then, I kind of continued doing what I was doing. And I mentioned to my wife, I was like, hey, go check on our youngest. And she's like, I thought she was up. And I said, I called up, but I don't know. Well, I walk over and we've got an upstairs, and so I holler up and she's not up. And this is like 20 minutes later now.
Oh man.
And so it was
get that first day of school outfit on, get going.
Like we gotta go. And my wife was the first one to kind of jump on it, and then I looked at her and I was like, maybe you shouldn't be so like aggressive, and then that wasn't a good thing either. So then I've got conflict with like my wife, and then we've got conflict with our youngest daughter, and it's like, come on, like we got to go, like I need to be there, we need to leave at a certain time, and then of course, right, it was the lecture, the consequences, like you're going to bed at 6:30 tonight, no TV, and like you.
Man.
So it was, needless to say, it was not the start to the school year that I had hoped for.
You wouldn't put that as like your Instagram story for first day of school. No.
Yep. And so anybody that sees our like back to school picture on Facebook, like it's staged, right?
It was
like,
fully staged.
like
Was it even on the same day?
It was the same day.
Okay.
It was like calling back to our episode of like envy and like marketing. Like, just know that when you see that picture and everybody's smiling, the day did not start off.
The day is staged. Oh man. So moments like that, right? We've all had those moments. You get into it and you're trying to roll through, and you've got your own sinful heart that you're wrestling with, right? And I think that's a great place that Scripture really points us, when we're talking about us as dads, as moms, as parents, when we're discipling our children. The verse I think of immediately is Ephesians 6:4, right? It's the verse, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger or wrath, as I memorized it in King James, right? But bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, right? And so Paul is reminding, well, first of all, right, the main call there is to fathers. So dads, we've got that, our Father's Day episode. You can go back and listen to that about, I think that was episode 17, about, it's the dad setting the tone there, but it's not in a way that provokes them to anger. And it's that carries this idea of, a constant berating or lecturing or just laying such a heavy burden on our kids that they can't bear it, that they're going to react in anger and not receive our discipline and instruction. But it's on us to bring them up in that discipline. That word is really, it has a lot of, like, with teaching. It's the Greek paideia. You guys know, we like to throw Greek words
Greek
around.
Scholars.
Not scholars. We fake it. But we've got that word paideia, right, which is where we get like the teaching term. We might have heard of pedagogy, where you're teaching children, and that's that idea. You've got to lead them out into wisdom. And so it's the picture of a shepherd, leading the sheep where they're supposed to go. And that's what God has called us to do. Where you're not controlling them, you're leading them in the direction they should go. And that's gonna, you can't do that if you're not doing it yourself, right? It starts in your own heart.
That's really good stuff, and I've always wondered, like, why does Paul single out the dads, right? Like, he, like, what is it about dads, and like, do not provoke your children. And today, dads, like, we're guilty. Like, I don't know about you guys.
This verse has nothing to do with dad jokes inciting eye rolls, because I don't know. I'm pretty sure the Apostle Paul, if he were a dad, he would have told dad jokes.
You think so?
I think so.
Well, another verse, right, is Proverbs 4:23, where it tells us to keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. And so what that's telling us here is that what's happening in our heart is driving our behavior. And,
wow.
We know that because, like, modern psychology and all of the social emotional learning that has kind of come out of that, right? It tells us that what's inside of us, like what's inside of our heart, is gonna control. It's gonna dictate how we behave and how we treat others. So if we only focus on outward actions, we're really missing the root of the issue. So like, if I'm angry all the time and I decide, well, I'm not going to be angry anymore, I'm not addressing the heart issue that's leading to that anger. And when you think about like weeds in a yard, right? I don't cut my grass, right?
No.
We know that, but I do know what weeds are. And so sometimes I pull out weeds, like when I'm out there, like, working in our flower beds, right? But if you only trim the top, it's going to look better for a while, but the root is still there, and they grow back. It actually reminds me when we first bought our first house ever that we bought back in 2007. There was this. I don't know if it was a plant. I don't know if it was a weed. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it was like it took over our flower bed, and so and so I was like, I got this. So I went and got some like Roundup, and like I sprayed it, and like
did it kill everything?
Like it killed whatever this thing was, right? Okay. And so like it died, and then it was gone. But then like a few months later, it grew back stronger.
Oh my word.
And like it, like
you need super Roundup.
and like at that time, it took over everything, right? And so the root was still there. I didn't get the root. So then finally I had to go in there with like a shovel and like get the roots out. And the roots had grown all under the flower bed. But you think about that, right? When we parent without the heart, it's the same thing. Like if we're not dealing with the root issue inside of us or the root issue inside of our children, those roots start to take over and we think we've addressed the issue. But if we're not careful, those things are going to come back and sometimes worse than maybe even what they were initially.
Yeah, I've got a patio out back. And when we moved into our house, like there was no patio.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just the deck and the steps down to it. And then all of a sudden it was, dry stretch, a bunch of the grass started to die. And I noticed that there were some like paver stones in the grass underneath. I'm like, what in the world? So I grab a shovel and I start scraping that top. And it had grown over with the previous owner. He had just let the grass grow over the patio to the point that like it accumulated dirt and then the grass like continued to spread so that when we moved in, we didn't even know a patio was there.
Wow.
And then it was like it's probably a 8x8 patio that we had no clue was there. And we just scraped it up. But again, those roots underneath. Yeah. So I am constantly spraying Roundup on those like cracks between those paver stones
in order to
keep it from doing exactly. And like when I did that, of course, again, sinful heart, I'm like complaining about the previous owner. Like what in the world was this guy thinking? Why did he just let it grow? I mean, that had to have taken years of neglect to get to that point. But then I understand, like, I'm spraying Roundup like twice a month on this thing to keep the weeds down. But that we can do that, right? We can do that with our child's hearts. We can just, cover it up. Yeah. We can just ignore it. Yeah. We can just constantly be dealing with the outworkings of it. Mm-hmm. But, the Bible talks about out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Yeah. Or, the constant places in the New Testament where it talks about, the fruit of, what's going on in our lives. So, we just kind of have to move from there, right? And be honest and think, okay, we've got our natural instinct, but how is it that we can shift from, our natural response of, lecturing, anger, behavior modification, and actually shift into a redemptive response?
Well, we want to be clear here too that we understand discipline is necessary, right?
Yeah.
So Nate and I aren't saying that discipline consequences isn't a part of parenting. So we don't want to swing the pendulum all the other way.
True.
And somebody hear this and be like, "Oh, if I'm supposed to be a good parent, then my kid never gets disciplined." No, that's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that if that's all you do, you might win the moment, but you lose the heart, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happened with that flower bed, right?
Yep.
Like I won the moment. I beat that huge
the big weed,
but it grew back worse, right? And so, but when we shift to a redemptive response, right? When we start asking, how can I use this moment of failure to point my child to grace, to confession, or a real change in Christ, that's where discipleship starts to happen. And that's really what we want to drive home here is that, yes, there's going to be discipline. Yes, there's going to be consequences, but we want to make sure that we're shifting our response to a redemptive response.
Yeah. And you guys know, like, we're all about practical tools and getting, real practice of what this looks like. We can talk about all day the Bible verses that tell us to, aim for the heart and shepherd the heart and those types of things. But we want to give you a practical tool. But before we jump into kind of a really practical tool we've found from Paul Tripp, who also wrote the book Shepherding a Child's Heart, we've got, just want to take a moment and ask you guys for a favor. We are a small podcast. We're a new podcast. And one thing that would be really helpful is if you guys jumped on and you left us a review and shared this episode with somebody. That's the biggest way that we can, share these tools with other people, with other parents, and have more of us, standing shoulder to shoulder, discipling our own children so that they they, can be raised up and their hearts can be formed. And so this would be a great way for other parents to find encouragement so that they can be equipped for impact. So if you would do that, go ahead and go on wherever you listen to this, share us, review us, whatever, and that would be a huge help.
Do it now, right?
Right now. Pause it.
Stop what you're doing.
Not while you're driving.
Yes, if you're driving, don't do it. But if you're listening to us in your office or while you're cutting the grass.
While you're cutting the grass, you can just stop under the tree, turn the blades off, and then you can keep going. So
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I do.
But I assume
I do.
somebody that cuts grass knows what you're
That's
talking
exactly right. Okay, enough nonsense. Let's get back into this. So Paul Tripp gives us a really helpful framework, and I first heard this. It was, I think, a video series about shepherding children with grace. And he's written several books on parenting, and Shepherding a Child's Heart is a great book, but it's 5 simple questions that get beneath the surface. So let's walk through these and kind of give some examples. So you kind of come into a situation, classic, he took my toy, she took the remote, he did, he hit me, whatever. So instead of blowing up, first question you can ask is, what's going on? Okay, simple question. Ask your child what's going on. Lewis, why do you think we should start with that question there of just simply asking what's going on?
Well, because it focuses on the situation, right? And so you are allowing your child to think through what's happening, like what is happening in that moment, right? He grabbed my toy and I hit him. That's what's going on, and it's just the fact. It's just laying out what happened. And so, as a parent, you're able to understand. All right, these are the facts that I'm dealing with, and hopefully, it de-escalates the situation. It allows the child to process. This is what happened.
Yep. Their brains are being flooded with, adrenaline and all the different hormones in the middle of an intense situation. So it gives them a chance to just pause for a beat.
Yep. And then as a parent, it lets you understand what started it, right? Because if you're assessing the situation, it gives you a minute. Because if we're honest, the normal standard response of our sinful heart is yell, stop it. Both of you go to your room, or I don't want to hear this, or whatever. But this is allowing you to assess the situation and understand what's happening, but also what started it. So it gives you time as a parent to be able to process the facts.
Yeah. I really like this because sometimes when you say stop it, right, it's so ambiguous.
Yeah.
Like, stop what?
Yeah.
And you think well, I know what I want them to stop.
Yeah.
I want you to stop fighting.
Yeah.
Right. But what are they really stopping?
Yeah.
And so, they might be, yelling really loud, or even just being goofy but they're too loud that they're, upsetting your podcast recording or something. We don't record at home, but you understand, and so you just say, stop it. And they're like, well, stop what? Stop playing, stop yelling, stop being loud. And so even in that situation, you haven't been clear.
Yeah.
So that it allows us to just get clear on what's going on in this.
Yeah. What's the second question, Nate?
So the second question is, what were you thinking and feeling as that was happening? What were you thinking and feeling as that was happening? So it starts with, just having them answer honestly, what was going on? And then now we start to get to the heart of it. What were you thinking and feeling as it was happening?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
Again, I didn't come from me, but there, it gets them to process, I was mad, right? He took my toy, and so I'm punching him.
Yeah.
And I just felt mad. I felt angry. I felt sad, and so I want to get even. And that really starts to get to the heart of what's going on emotionally for your child.
And that helps them name their emotions and thoughts, right? It actually allows them to take their thoughts captive, because now they are processing and thinking of their thoughts. Because when you're angry, right? What does the world tell us to do, right? To lash out, to react, and I can justify why I feel it, right? That was unfair. But now, by just asking that question, you're helping them see their inner world. You're helping them think about what's going on. And sometimes kids' feelings reveal insecurities that maybe we as parents never knew or never understood that they were thinking.
Yeah. It's, if your child is a perfectionist, so I've got, and my kids get it from us, right? Her parents are both perfectionists in certain ways, but like that perfectionism, even inside, my child, will come out in certain ways. And so getting a conversation going can even bring that out. Like I was trying to be, perfect, to have this thing lined up exactly the way you wanted it, or the way I wanted it, and my sister messed it up, things like that. And so even there, like if you're just dealing with that behavior, whatever it was, the yelling, the hitting, the outburst, the argument, like they can cover that up, but it's not going to deal with the deeper issue of I'm trying to be perfect all the time, right? And they're not helping them realize that's really what's fueling their actions. So a good question of, what were you thinking and feeling as this happened? So then, we can keep that going. Okay, they've named what they were feeling. So that the next question would be, what did you do in response? What did you do in response? I love this one because it just comes down to ownership, right? You're getting them to own what they did. Why do you think that's an important step in this, Lewis?
Well, because you're connecting their actions to the heart, right? That it's allowing them to see that they did something and helping them understand why they did it, right? Like if I've got two girls and they're always fighting about something, right? I don't know if your girls get along great or if they're ever fighting, but my girls fight about stuff and it's silly stuff, right? But sometimes
it's classic sisters,
right? So sometimes when we're unpacking it, one of them will storm off or one of them will go to the room, and shut the door and that's what they know to do. That's what they know to react to. Like they want to get away from the situation. So then we got to bring them back together to understand, like, why did you do that, right? Like it allows them to connect their actions back to their heart.
Yeah. And some of this, like, it's kind of hard. Like if you've got especially younger children, that can be big things to think about. Like just trying to say, well, why? Well, I don't know, right? Yeah. But if you're leading them through this process, right? What were you thinking and feeling? And then what did you do in response? Well, they can name that, right? They can name, oh, I hit them, I slammed the door, I grabbed it, I snatched the toy away.
And that goes naturally into the next question, which I think really is the key question, right? Is what did you want to accomplish?
Yeah.
Right? Because I think that when we ask that question, we're helping our child understand and reveal their motives and desires, right? So I wanted my toy back. I wanted control. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be heard. And that's where you see, and they hopefully see, that that's what's driving their behavior. So you think about a kid who maybe cheats on an exam, right? Or they cheat on a test, and that's a big deal, especially in the context of a school, right? And that's not just bad behavior, but you help them unpack that. Maybe to your point, if your child is a perfectionist, right? They cheated because they didn't study. And the reason that they didn't study is because they were doing something, maybe something else that they shouldn't have been doing, but ultimately they wanted to get a good grade because they wanted your approval, or they wanted to keep the perfect average, right? And so it allows you to see what really drives their behavior, and maybe you unpack that it's a desire for approval, for control, for perfection, for a false a view that people may have of them.
Yeah, and which then rolls into the last question number 5. What was the result? Right. And I was telling you before we hit record here, like I keep these 5 questions on my desk. I'm a school principal, and so I'm helping students talk through, their bad decisions frequently as just part of my job. But that one, like when I land with that question, it was like, well, what was the result? Sometimes I even just flip it around and it's like, well, how did that turn out for you? Working with middle schoolers, kind of more casual there, but really that's what that is. Like they felt a certain way.
Yeah.
So they did something in order to accomplish their end goal, right? Which they named, but did that actually turn out the way they thought it would,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I wanted control. And so I snatched the literally remote control out of my sister's hand. Well, now how's that going out for you? You know, how's that working out for you? Did you actually get what you wanted? You cheated on a test, you know? And so you wanted, because you wanted to get a good grade or keep your high average or whatever it was.
Well, you have the approval.
Or have the approval, right? But now you've been caught. You're going to get a consequence. Probably get a 0 on that assignment. So how'd that work out for you? And then that really helps your child think through the actual consequences of their actions. You know, it never turns out the way we expected it to. And, you know, I think you're never supposed to say the word never, but it never turns out the way that you expect it to. That's why you're having that conversation. They wanted something, they did something to get it, and now it didn't work on them. It backfired. And so those would be your 5 questions. And you can go through that, and that allows both you and your child to slow down in the moment. And instead of just saying, don't do that, or don't hit your brother, or don't yell at your sister, you're guiding your child to understand their heart motives. And then you can connect it back to the gospel. So in these conversations, like, Lewis, how would you walk through it? You kind of have unpacked your child's emotions and goals and the actions. How would you then connect that to a gospel conversation?
And, you know, that's the goal, right? We want to connect it back to a gospel conversation. And we're not doing this to give you the Jesus juke, right? You know, like, this isn't so that you can come back and be like, what would Jesus do, right? Or
Jesus died on the cross because
Jesus,
you hit your sister.
That's right. But maybe you just say, you know, son, daughter, you wanted control more than you wanted to love your brother, but God calls us to put others first. And the good news is that Jesus forgives us when we put ourselves first, and he gives us the power to change. That's an example of shepherding the heart. You're not pulling out the Jesus juke, but you're helping your child understand their sinful behavior, what that sinful behavior leads to, but understanding that God calls us to something different.
I think we need to make T-shirts, like, equipped for impact on the front, and then, like, on the back, pulling out the Jesus juke.
Pulling out the Jesus juke. Yeah. Have you heard of the Jesus juke before?
I have not heard of the Jesus juke. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise you, no, but it was a context that I grew up in, and it's this idea of you know, you're having a conversation with somebody, and then all of a sudden you pull out the Jesus juke, right? And then it's like, whoa, like, where did that come from? Like, I didn't know this conversation was going to turn it into a Jesus conversation.
Yeah. So as parents, we have to remember, you know, these moments, they're opportunities for the gospel. We are shepherding their hearts, and our kids, you know, they're not going to be perfect, right? But God can use us to direct them and help them in their process of progressive sanctification, to use the theological term, right? And sometimes that means we need to confess it when we mess up, right? We might roll into a situation, you know, like responding police officers, and just, you know, blow up and deal with it. And when we come back to that, you know, we might have to come back through to our children and say, you know, I shouldn't have reacted that way. I shouldn't have raised my voice. It doesn't, you know, excuse their behavior, right? But their behavior also doesn't excuse yours, you know? So coming into that and asking for forgiveness, you know, it models that humility and the gospel in action for our children.
And that's powerful, right? Like, when parents say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have raised my voice, I shouldn't have acted that way, I shouldn't have done that outburst, will you forgive me? It models humility, and it shows the gospel in action. I remember one of my best moments from last year when I had a great Dad of the Year moment, when my daughter was talking to me, and I reacted in a way that I shouldn't have. And we were at a restaurant, and it was a restaurant that she was looking forward to going to and was excited. And then I remember my
Bonfire?
It wasn't Bonfires.
Oh, okay.
No, it wasn't. I do like Bonfires. This was Pizza Villa in Kinston, and so we were having like a family meal.
If either of those restaurants want to sponsor the Equip for Impact podcast, you podcast@wayneChristian.org.
We would love to have you as a sponsor.
That's right.
Especially if we get free food. Always free food. And so, you know, I had an outburst that I shouldn't have had, and I remember my wife looking at me and being like, Are you proud of yourself? Like, are you happy? And I wasn't, right? Like, I felt terrible, right? I mean, I realized, and so I had to go back to my daughter, and in a moment where it was just, her and me in the car and be like, hey, I'm sorry that I acted that way. I'm sorry I said that. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And it goes a long way.
Yeah. So when we go into that, right, whether it's these 5 questions, whether it's, just having to ask for forgiveness, hopefully you got some great practical takeaways from just this conversation here, and learning from some of our mistakes as dads. So let's kind of just recap, right? There are three big ideas as we go through this, and things you can do right away. Number one, I would say, memorize these 5 questions. Or I told you I have them printed on my desk. So print them out. In fact, what we're going to do is we'll have a printable version of these podcast or these questions ready. And if you email us at podcast@wayneChristian.org, we'll automatically send a copy to you. So just send us an email with your best dad joke, with questions that you might have, with just saying, hey, how much you love breakfast for dinner, and we will automatically send you these things. We just want to hear from you, and so we also want to get this to you. But it's really easy. Keep them printed. Memorize them, whatever, and then that way you can use them in a conversation.
Yeah. Another thing to remember, like we talked about, is pause before responding. Right? Take a breath.
Yep.
Pray silently. Ask God for wisdom. I don't think anybody has ever said, "I am so thankful I responded immediately to a situation with an emotional outburst." Like, I don't think anybody ever says that. Right? It's usually we regret that we responded so quickly with an emotional outburst.
Yep. A wise man once told me, never miss an opportunity to shut your mouth.
That's really good.
Of course, that was also my father when I was a teenage boy. So there you go.
I may steal that one.
Never miss an opportunity to shut your mouth.
To shut your mouth.
Yep. So that's a good one. I mean, as dads, as moms, we can do that too. Hey, sometimes you just got to shut your mouth for a second. And then you can come back at it. And number 3, end with hope, right? As you walk through this, you're talking through these questions. It's not about getting them to behave better. It's about pointing them to the gospel, right? See forgiveness and restoration in their lives, whether it's with you as their parent or their sibling or whoever else, right? They can live in that forgiveness and grace, and with that, then walking in obedience to Christ.
And if you do these 3 things, you'll see that you start turning discipline moments into discipleship moments, and I think you'll reap great benefits in the lives of your children.
That's awesome. So, Lewis, as we close out, any last words of encouragement for our listeners here?
Yeah, parents, let me encourage you with this. Right, your job is not to raise perfect kids, because if so, we're failing
terribly,
right? But it's to shepherd them towards the one who is perfect, and that's our Savior, right? Every failure, whether it's yours or your child's, is a chance to point to the gospel. And so this week, when you're tempted to react, take a step back, remember these questions, think back to this episode, and just remember that God is using you to reach their heart.
That's right. So thanks so much for that. And thank you guys for listening to Equipped for Impact. Like we said, if this episode encouraged you, share it with another parent who needs a reminder that God uses even the hard moments to shape our children's hearts. That'll do great to help them be equipped for impact, and it'll also help just this podcast grow so that more parents can learn and grow together. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, answering your child's big questions.
Ooh, that's going to be good.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a series, right? So if you've got a question, maybe one of these big questions your kid has asked you, put that in that email to podcast@wayneChristian.org. Not only will you get that PDF printout, but we'll maybe throw that big question in one of our episodes.
What's an example of a big question so people know?
Well, big questions like, who is God?
Ooh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why did my teacher say we evolved from monkeys?
Ooh.
That's a good one.
What about this one? If God really knows everything, why does bad stuff still happen?
Ooh, yep. Big questions like that.
Yeah.
So there you go. If you've got some big questions, email us at podcast@waynechristian.org. And until then, keep leading the next generation to stand firm in their faith and influence their world for Christ.